Hello everyone, it's me Clayton. I just finished watching Pluto, the long-awaited animated series based on Naoki Urasawa's manga series that was animated by Studio Genko, a veteran of a veteran production of the animation industry that took 6 years to create this series based off one of the most legendary reimaginings in manga history. Now, for anyone who knows Astro Boy, originally created by Osamu Tezuka, many people know its influence on animation as a whole, and how it created many tropes and many classic character archetypes that we still see today in modern anime. Now, Pluto was a manga that was created by Naoki Urasawa in 2003 and it lasted till about 2009. And despite this series coming out 2 decades after the manga originally came out, I think it still stands up even to this day, especially with its themes, its characters, and its production values. But let's get to the story, shall we? The story revolves around a serial killer who happens to be going around the entire world killing the 7 most powerful robots in that world. This takes place in the future where robots and humans coexist, and when this being known as Pluto ends up killing one of the most powerful robots in the world, who is also assisting the Netherlands with conservation efforts, Mont Blanc. A detective named Gesicht, which is German for face, decides to investigate Mont Blanc's murder as well as a bunch of murders that happen to be connected to his, especially considering that all the murders have a calling card with a pair of horns being put near the crime scenes, usually near the victim himself. So, since Gesicht happens to be another one of the 7 robots who's the most powerful in the world, he's also a murder target. So, the series revolves around Gesicht trying to protect the other robots of the world while they try to find out who is responsible for creating Pluto and why they created Pluto in order to basically save the world and also to make sure that humans and robots can still coexist. Along with having a rather interesting detective story with some seriously impressive production values for its action scenes as well as for its dialogue scenes, we also happen to have a lot of the story that's focused on essentially Naoki Urasawa's version of the Iraq War. So, anyone who grew up with that particular part of history is probably going to find a lot of plot points relatively familiar. As in, a good portion of the plot takes place in the Middle East. One of the villains happens to have a lot of issues with policies of the United States of Thracia, which is the stand in for United States of America. And even some of the events of the manga match up with some of the stuff that actually happened in the Iraq War. So it definitely does feel like it was being pulled from the headlines in Hirasawa's case when it was originally written in 2003, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's used for political statements that don't age very well. Instead, it feels like it's a more universal story about hatred and how it ultimately just builds onto itself and how it ultimately will lead to nothing but more and more destruction if the cycle of hatred isn't broken. In that case, it's great that Naoki Urasawa also did Monster, considering he had handled very similar psychological themes in that series. And not only is the animation sticking true to his art style, but it had some dang good voice work from both the Japanese and English casts to bring the story to life. I mean, heck, even from the Monster dub, it brings back actors like Patrick Seitz, Keith Silverstein, Richard Epcar, Laura Stahl. It basically brings a who's who of the dub anime game to get into it. And even in the Japanese dub, you've got voice actors like Koichi Yamadera and Yoko Ikasa. Even Keith David happens to make an appearance as Professor Tenma. So yes, while the series often has original characters to use, it happens to also use characters directly from Osamu Tezuka's works, like Professor Tenma. But it happens to do so in a way that feels like a loving homage to these characters without feeling like a cruel parody. And at the same time, the themes, the pacing, and the animation are often so great that you don't even mind that the series has about 8 hours worth of content in it, as each episode's about an hour long when it comes down to it. At no point does it ever get boring, and at no point does it feel like the writing suffers from the length. And that's why I'm going to give Pluto a 9.5 out of 10. See you next time.